Well, here now are Camilla Tominey and Mark Stevens. And it was unprecedented. None of us have ever seen anything like that before.
No. Should we have seen it? This is the question now that people are asking, not just, I think, at home, but behind palace gates. This idea of putting the Duke of York up for 45 to 50 minutes on one single subject. There's a post-mortem being carried out, I think, now, and aides are scratching their heads as to the decision-making process, which meant that it was almost a bit of a lamb to the slaughter in that interview. Ordinarily, and you guys will be familiar with this because you have to set up high-profile interviews on this show, conditions are attached. Well, you're allowed one question of Virginia Roberts, but I also want you to talk about his charitable work, his initiatives for the palace, and his relationship with his daughters, for instance, as part of a package. For this, it was just, you ask whatever you like, and it left him terribly exposed.
So how has that been allowed to happen, then?
Well, I think the impetus from the private office, the Duke's private office, was that they wanted to not make it too cosy and to make it rigorous so that no one could accuse them of a cop-out and of not facing the allegations head-on. Let's not forget the original intention of this was to move the narrative in a different direction. I think they thought, perhaps naively, that if he addressed these allegations, they would all go away. What it's done is created this three-day media storm, which is continuing into this week, because the interview hasn't landed particularly well. And equally, there has been this sense that his office has operated in a silo here, hasn't consulted the press office or indeed the Queen's private office in advance of their planning, because we understand this has been about 6 months in the making. And so now there's this sense the Queen was aware of the interviewing having taken place, but in no part of that Buckingham Palace statement that was issued at the weekend did they say that she had given it her blessing.
Well, one of his PR advisors, Jason Stein, actually quit his job,
yes,
allegedly because of the fact that this was against his advice.
Yeah, so Jason used to be the special advisor to Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary. He went over. He didn't actually get employed by the royal household in the end, but he went there in a capacity of somebody who could advise on how best to reputationally manage this situation. My understanding is his advice was put him up for a newspaper interview with the UK press and a US publication for his 60th birthday in February, have him address the allegations there as part of a wider chat to do with his birthday and his place in the royal family.
Mark, would you, if you'd been his lawyer, would you have advised him to do this?
No reputation management professional would have advised him to do this. The only circumstances in which you do it are if you've got detailed answers which completely exculpate you. So, for example, if he had been able to get the police records of where he was at a particular time, because, of course, he's surrounded by a security detail, if he had been able to say, look, here's the reports from the policemen, they say I was in Woking, not at Tramp nightclub, I've got a complete alibi. But we didn't get that.
There must be police logs here. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
We all have diaries. I can go back through my diaries and see where I was. And so then, but there must be official diaries, police diaries, his own engagement diaries that will surely show where he was with
exactly right. And of course the challenge is that he admits that he was at Jeffrey Epstein's house in New York, he was at Ghislaine Maxwell's house in London and at the island. And so once that has been accepted, the problem then is, what did you do? So I anticipated that this was going to be car crash, train wreck television. In fact, it was a train wreck running into a fuel tanker which just burst into flames. You know, he's basically lit the blue touch paper on a story which he didn't need to be involved in. He is only wanted as a witness in this case, and now it's very, very difficult because everybody's got attention on him.
Although, I was going to say, of course, the palace and he has vehemently denied any sexual impropriety whatsoever. The trouble was there was always the issue of judgment to address. People were wondering, well, why on earth did you maintain a friendship with a convicted paedophile after he had been released from prison? And the explanations he gives for that aren't particularly convincing.
Or sympathetic, either, to the victims.
Talking about Epstein's behaviour being unbecoming is probably not the best word to use. Second of all, I had to stay in New York because it was the most inconvenient place. Well, presumably there were other places he could have...
Well, in 2001, Epstein's released from prison, given 18 months, released after 13, registered sex offender. And so I think that one of the things that many people find quite extraordinary is that you would go to him, that you would walk with him in the park, of which there's photographic evidence, and then you would stay at his house to tell him that you couldn't see him anymore.
Well, of
Many
course, the
people, yeah.
problem with that is that the staff, the courtiers, the advisors will all have known about the conviction. They will have been saying to him, this is unwise, don't do it. And he's obviously decided that he's going to do it. The honorary consul, which is where royals usually stay in New York, is just a few houses down the same street.
Yeah.
You know, so he could have stayed there. That was convenient.
They definitely did advise him not to maintain the relationship at all. Sometimes we get the impression in these TV interviews that the royals are sorry about having been caught in this situation, but not necessarily about the consequences to others.
Can I just ask you, today you've sort of changed the story slightly to suggest that, you know, once Charles becomes king, that actually things will change for Andrew and that he may not be so protected anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we've got extensive, like all the papers in the Telegraph, we've sort of written the story, and a former royal correspondent said this yesterday. Prince Charles wants a slimmed-down monarchy. He wants the major players being on the Buckingham Palace balcony, and that basically means his children and grandchildren. It doesn't mean people who are much further down the pecking order. Prince Andrew has always kind of maintained this supremacy within the family because he's very close to his mother, obviously, and he regards his children, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, as blood princesses who must have a role. But every time he's been put back in his box, effectively, particularly by Prince Charles's side of the staff, who are saying, no, there isn't a role for you and your daughters moving forward because the issue has changed. So people are asking themselves, when Charles does take the throne, is this going to make Prince Andrew's position in public royal life a little bit more untenable?
Okay. All right, well, we can also talk to former Royal Protection Officer Di Davies. Di, thank you for joining us this morning. You've gone quite strong with this. You think that this warrants a police investigation, don't you?
Well, good morning. Yes, I did. And let me first and foremost say my thoughts are with the 35 to 40 victims on all this who didn't appear hardly to be mentioned on this documentary. So that's my first thought. The second thought is that anyone who has material evidence should actually come forward and give it to the appropriate authorities. That's also crucial. Now, Prince Andrew, like everybody else, is entitled to the fact that he is innocent of anything until proof says otherwise. But I do feel, having read some of the testimonies, there is a credible case why he should be interviewed. And if that evidence points to any criminality, then it should be under caution. That's all I'm saying.
What other questions would you have asked Prince Andrew?
I don't think you've got long enough for me to mention all the questions. I think Emily did a fantastic job, but she's not a police officer. Why did he choose to stay there for 4 days when perfectly proper down the road? He had 2 years to know that his friend, so-called, what else has he got on Prince Andrew? I wonder. All of this will come out, trust me.
Would the protection officers, I mean, assuming that there would be a record as to whether or not he ever went to Tramp, because his protection officers would have been there with him?
Absolutely so. I would have thought whether they kept minutiae records every day of where they went, I can't remember, and I don't think they probably would have. But they were very, very experienced officers. And he doesn't deny that he has been to Tramp. He doesn't say that he says he doesn't know where the bar is. Well, he wouldn't. Drinks would be provided for him, etc., etc. You know, there's about 20 key areas where I would have pressed him a lot harder in terms of the Mews, the New York, and indeed on the island. So there's many, many questions unanswered. There may be answers, I don't know, but I merely tell you, as somebody who's now spent half a century investigating a wide variety of crimes at home and abroad, I still have a lot of questions I would like to put to him.
Thank you very much, Di. Just a final question for you, Mark. Do you think they have completely lost the narrative over this?
They have. The whole thing about the royal family never responding, never replying, gives them some measure of control. Now we're left in a position where he's effectively unveiled his private life to a journalist, and if he's prepared to speak to a journalist, it's really difficult for him not to stand and give evidence on oath in America to the lawyers and also to the FBI.
Despite having diplomatic immunity.
Despite having diplomatic immunity, because the pressure from the public is going to say, well, you spoke to Emily Maitlis, why not the FBI?
Yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, all morning we've been running a poll asking whether Prince Andrew should retire from the royal front line.
Well, we'll show you the results now.
Wow.
81% say yes, 19% currently say no.
Not looking good, is it? No.